Welcome, welcome. How are we all doing tonight? We are recording at 2:20 in the AM, and I gotta say right now, whew, whew, I wanted to try. I really wanted to try and do one video without mentioning the polar bear, but the news today was just too much to not address. So we are going to get to the polar bear. I have some pretty significant comments about that situation, but first, interesting developments today. The New York Mets meeting with Tanner Scott, and Tanner Scott is very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Because without a doubt, Tanner Scott is the best option right now on the bullpen side. Tanner Scott is a guy lefty who could throw 100 miles per hour. Nasty, nasty stuff. Last year had a four WAR. He was 9-6 with a 1.75 ERA. I mean, if you could pair him with an Edwin Diaz, I mean, this is what I like about the Mets situation. You already have an Edwin Diaz there. That makes the Tanner Scott acquisition, and it's going to be tough because, of course, the Dodgers are interested. The Red Sox are potentially interested. There are a lot of teams interested, and rightfully so. This is the type of acquisition, Tanner Scott, that, could be like a deadline move. I mean, there are a lot of times at the deadline, you're looking for that big reliever, but it costs you too much. Two top prospects. Would you want to give a Jet Williams at the deadline, a Jet Williams plus at the deadline for relief help? Well, because that's what the cost is. I mean, we got lucky last year with Phil Maton and some other very creative moves, but bullpens are hit and miss. So if you can get a Tanner Scott on a good short-term contract, I mean, he's worth the high annual average salary that you will have to pay. I mean, look at it like this. If you're not confident in your starting pitching, and like many people are, I mean, you got Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga, but still there are a lot of question marks. How do you make your team better in other areas? Well, you can obviously improve your defense, run prevention. That always helps. You can, shorten the game. If you have a good bullpen that can lock down the eighth and the ninth inning, all right, that's good too as well. And a guy like Tanner Scott does that. You could bring him in the seventh inning at certain point. If Diaz needs a rest, now you got a bona fide, legit top closer who can fill in. I mean, with him and Diaz, I mean, that is a dynamic duo made in heaven. I would love that. Like I mentioned, one's from the left side, one is from the right side, and these guys are both fireballs, can throw gas. I mean, I would just love to see that thing. And, it goes outside of David Stern's footprint. He often doesn't invest a lot of money, especially in bullpen help. I mean, forget about like a long-term contract because he never does that. He never does that. So if it's like a 4-year contract, and, that's what I kind of saw when I was doing a little research. He's looking for 4 years, $80 million. I think if, it comes down to that, I don't know if I would even want to say 3-year range, but maybe the Mets would do. Tanner Scott, he's going to be 30 years old. It could be something that it becomes doable. Preferably, it would want to be in that 1 to 2 year range. That's where David Stearns likes to strike. But I just think it makes the dynamic of the team. It bolsters everybody. Like Jose Budo, now he becomes that much more dynamic leverage. Drew Smith or, somebody in that type of role, or Brooks Raley. However, the Mets fill out that rest of the bullpen, it just looks so much better if you got those two, kind of top echelon players at the end of the bullpen. Let me know what you think, because I think it just changes the whole dynamic of the team if you have a bullpen that is just dominant, dominant. That's why I was really I really wanted a Devin Williams. It wasn't in the cards, but we have an opportunity to get another top, closer or end of the game guy. Okay, so let me know what you think about that, and All right, so let's get to the polar bear. And, my last video, I gotta say, it garnered a lot of interest on the polar bear, but, I would say a lot of people kind of misinterpreted um, the, these videos. This is not something for you to kind of take personal. Honestly, I got an email from a gentleman, and the email basically asked me if I'm a Mets fan. I mean, I've been a Mets fan for over 30 years, right? And I'm not the kind of Mets fan that no matter what the Mets do, oh, yeah, yeah, great job, great job. No, my end goal, and I've said this since I started the channel, is for the New York Mets to win a World Series, right? So obviously, we haven't won a World Series since 1986. So, yes, we've done some things right. We've made strides, but we've also made a lot of mistakes, and, a lot of things didn't work out. So, honestly, what I do is if things aren't, you know, going in a direction where I think is conducive to us winning a World Series, I will say so. I will say so. Now, Pete Alonso is a big boy, folks. He doesn't need anybody to defend him. He made 20 and a half million. He made almost $21 million last year. I don't know. I mean, I know we probably have some wealthy folks out there, but I guarantee he made more than 99% of us. So he's not a guy that we need to feel sorry for. Pete Alonso is a guy that I'm a fan of. He's a guy that I would want here. I want everybody to hear that. I mean, the comments I got, and maybe you're not watching the videos, maybe you're just getting sucked into the titles, but let me be clear. If you are watching right now, I would love to have Pete Alonso back on a short-term deal at the right price for a couple of reasons. One, I like Pete. I think that he's a great guy. I think that he has a lot of untapped potential still. Number two, I think he's one of the best options available right now. Unless you're trading for Vladdy Guerrero Jr., I think he is, if not the best option available for the New York Mets. So why wouldn't I want our team to have the best option? All right. Um, and it just comes down to today's news. All right, so today's news comes out from Mr. Bob Nightingale. Bob Nightingale says that the Mets and Pete Alonso are looking, if we do get together, it would more than likely be on that short-term deal that we've been talking about. 3 years, 90 million. A fourth year might be, that might be the thing that gets it done eventually. But the thing that just blew my mind away, blew my mind, and I kind of had to check this a couple times because a lot of these stories, unless it's coming from a Jeff Passan, you don't know. You don't know. So obviously, Bob Nightingale, he's gotten some things right. Okay, yeah, it came from Bob. All right. So Bob says that Scott Boras and Pete Alonso are looking for that Prince Fielder type contract. 9 years, 210 odd $1 million. What Prince Fielder got back in the day. And as soon as I heard that, I'm like, oh my God, what is the point? What is the point? The only, a couple of things. All right, strategically. All right, number one, was this old news? Was this what he was looking for in the beginning of the offseason? Because it makes no sense now for you to be looking for a contract like that. I mean, and then also Prince Fielder. We know he signed that contract at a couple years younger than what Pete was, and it was a complete failure, that contract. Prince Fielder got hurt. And I know Scott Boras's dilemma, and this is what I've said in many videos. I said if first of all, Scott Boras his job should have been to give better advice, right? I think he messed this up from the beginning. But number two, he had to somewhat create a market for Pete. You do that by not overvaluing yourself. What if Soto said, hey, I want 18 years, $1.2 billion? All right, no matter how good you are, you're not worth that. Nobody would pay that. I mean, Soto went for a lot of money, but there were 5 teams willing to pay Soto around that price. Scott Boras has literally set a price where nobody was ever interested. Nobody. So if maybe in the beginning of the offseason he said 6 years 150 or 5 years 150, at least that would have gave teams, okay, you know what? They are willing to talk. That is reasonable. Maybe he'll settle for 5 years 130. But starting at 9 years, over 200 million, I mean, I thought he was starting at 7 years. 7 years to hear he's looking for a 9-year contract. The polar bears wanting to play to age 40, and great, all the power to the polar bear, all the power to the polar bear. But I did a poll. A couple days ago, and I asked, whose fault is it more that Pete Alonso is not signed? I had 700 votes. Thank all of you. I appreciate your feedback. But 63% of you said it's Scott Boras' fault. 37% said it's Pete. Now, honestly, if Scott Boras put this out there that is what he's looking for, all the more reason why you got to point the finger to Scott. But Pete Alonso is certainly not innocent. Certainly not innocent. Yeah, maybe it's what you sought after, but right now, 2 months into the offseason, and you're one of the last remaining big free agents, you might want to nudge your partner Scott Boras and say, hey, you know what? I want to be with a team and I want to be there for spring training, which is going to start in another month, about 5 weeks. So it's both their kind of a fault, and also too Scott Boras, and this is what I was going to say before. Scott Boras, all right, should have given examples to teams. All right, you know what? This contract worked out for Albert Pujols. This contract worked out for Miguel Cabrera. This contract worked out for Ryan Howard. The problem is there is no good example of a long-term contract over 5 years for first baseman over 30 that has ever worked out, ever in Major League Baseball history. Right? So the best he can come up with is a Prince Fielder. And then you're like, well, that didn't work out. Well, then Scott Boras, he could say, well, the only reason that one didn't work out was because Prince Fielder got hurt. If Prince Fielder didn't get hurt, that would have been a great contract. I mean, he can't point to Albert Pujols because he just got old. He can't point to Miguel Cabrera because he just got old. So you know what? Let's go to Prince Fielder, a guy who we could say would have been that guy who worked out, because no other contract worked out. The fact of the matter is a lot of these first basemen who profile like Pete get old at around 32, 33. Can Pete be the exception? Sure he can. And I looked at stats, Baseball Savant, and I do my own little formulas. I have an economics background. I like stats. I like numbers, right? So, if I look at, I came up with a figure. It's called the total skill value, right? So basically what I do is I look at all the stats on Baseball Savant that Pete Alonso has for 2022, expected WOBA, expected batting average, expected slug, all the good things, all the things. So then what I'll do is I'll give him an average score for each year. So Pete Alonso's best average score, where his total skill level was the highest, was actually 2021. He received a score of 68.7. 2022 was also a great year. He had received a score at 68. 2023, despite hitting 46 home runs, a lot of his advanced numbers took a downward turn. His total skill level was 58. Actually, in 2024, despite looking not so great in a couple moments, Pete Alonso's total skill value actually went up to almost 61. So, did he have a lot of bad luck? I think so. He had a lot of bad luck, and he wasn't good with those runners in scoring position. So it really makes his overall numbers not look good. I mean, if you don't hit with runners in scoring position, you're not going to have many RBIs. His home runs were obviously down, so that hurt his overall production as well. But Pete, couple simple things that he can work on. bad on the breaking ball this year. Bad on the breaking ball. Bad on the slider, the slurve, the curveball. He hit good on the fastball, good on the changeup. And another thing he did differently in 2024 was he let a lot more first pitches go through. Pete usually in the past, in his great years, would swing 30 to 33% of the time on first pitch strikes. Now he was only swinging in that 24%, in that range. That basically set himself up to see much more breaking ball. I think Juan Soto is going to allow Pete Alonso to exercise his strength, which is to see more fastballs. See more fastballs. So, the New York Mets have to do a good job at making sure Pete is protected, folks. Pete is protected because if Pete's seeing fastballs, his bat speed is actually in the 93rd percentile. He is elite with bat speed. In terms of hitting fastballs, Pete is still elite. He is elite at hitting the changeup. It is the breaking balls that kill the crap out of the Pete Alonso, the polar bear. So the Mets have to do a good job finishing the construction of this lineup. And the good thing is, based on the news that has come out in the last couple days, Jeff Passan basically told us 2 days ago, and I apologize, I couldn't do a video on that specific day, but Jeff Passan told us that David Stearns is far from finished. He is still looking for a starter. He is still looking for a couple lineup options. He's looking for another big arm out of the bullpen. Tanner Scott, as we mentioned at the opening, would be a phenomenal choice. But the good thing is David Stearns is not done. The funny thing is on SNY tonight, Andy Martino was asked that same question. Do you think the Mets are looking for another starter? And just the opposite of what Passan said. Andy Martino's like, no, I think we're basically all set. We're set with Montas. We're set. That's BS. Remember last year when they asked Martino, all the Mets done spending? And at that time, he's like, the Mets have about $10 million left to spend. Yeah, then after that, they got JD Martinez. They got a couple more relievers. So they spent well more than what what Andy Martino says. Andy Martino loves to convey information that enrages the New York Mets fans. So, Andy, keep doing your thing. You get Met fans to react, but still, let's be a little accurate here. All right, so Jeff Passan, probably the most accurate baseball reporter in the game right now, says that the Mets are in on that other pitcher and they are in on more bats. So the bats aspect is important because it's going to be hard right now for us to have, like, I would say a top 5 rotation, right? So the things we can do is improve defense, improve the bullpen, but improving the lineup is significant. So let's assume the obvious. And the obvious is that the Mets and Pete Alonso will eventually get together on a contract. It makes sense for both sides. Pete Alonso provides the most value to the New York Mets. For example, Pete has 226 career home runs. He is third all-time on the Mets all-time home run list, which is insane. Darryl Strawberry is the all-time leader with 252. After this season, if Pete remains a Met, he will be the all-time home run champion if he hits about 27 home runs. I think he's got to hit 27, 28, whatever. But that's a credit to him in his 7th full season that he can accomplish such a feat. So that is great. That is great for him, and it just works out. It just works out to have a homegrown Met, here for a couple more years, breaking those records. And at the end of the day, Pete has that potential. I think it really bothered him this year with the contract. It really bothered him. Has he had his moments where Pete didn't put his best foot forward? Yes, but he's a human being like we all are, and it happens, but I think, like I said, he provides us the best chance to improve now. Next year, things could change if we trade for Vladdy Guerrero, or you know what? Things could change quickly if Pete Alonso and Scott Boras don't come to their senses. So that's another thing. But I'm going to assume that they do. I'm going to assume that they come to their senses. All right, so we get Pete Alonso. I mean, Vladdy Guerrero Jr., if we went after him, that would come through a trade. We'd have to explore that. But other guys that are available options, I'll go to the top one. Bregman. Bregman, he's a guy who, if the Mets were to get Pete Alonso, a Breggy would go to third. That would slot Vientos over to DH. And you know what? Bregman is a guy who I think I think he's more of a David Stearns guy. He's a contact guy. He's a defensive guy. He's got a nice, sweet level swing. He's very patient at the plate. He's got that winning pedigree with Houston, championship type player. And he's got that like type of grit to him. He doesn't give a crap what the other team thinks. He's gonna do what he needs to do to win. Hopefully he doesn't cheat. But that is the type of player that, doesn't give a crap. And the moment will not be too big for him, folks. Moment will not be too big. So you're going to compile these type of championship type players, these guys who have success in the playoffs. You got a Juan Soto, a guy like Bregman, and even a guy like Pete Alonso. That is a major notch in his belt for that home run. Guys who are successful in the playoffs, and Lindor also had some big hits to get into the playoffs and in the playoffs as well. So you're compiling a team of hitters who don't give a damn what the circumstances are, but they just want to win. So I think an Alex Bregman, Pete Alonso combination could work. It just comes down to money. It comes down to money. If you sign Pete for a 3-year, $90 million contract with opt-out, I would want to sign Breggy for a similar type contract. Now, somebody asked me what would be the most optimal combination to pick up. I said it would probably be a Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and a Breggy, but that is not the most likely. Most likely, Pete Alonso. Secondary player could be a Bregman. A third guy could be an Anthony Santander. That guy is a little more interesting. He's interesting in the fact that Anthony Santander, he's had a career where he's been on an upward trajectory. He's the same age as Pete. They're both 30 years old, but Pete, it could be argued that he regressed. Santander, in the last couple of years, when he's 27, he had 33 home runs, 89 RBIs, 240 batting average. Last year, 28.95. This year, 44.102. So he's had his best year, especially if you're a big home run guy. OPS of 814. He's interesting. He's a guy I wouldn't want to give a crazy contract to because he is in his 30s. And he's also a guy who really hasn't really been that consistent, in my opinion. Hasn't been that consistent. He plays the outfield, so that the Mets were already interested in boosting their outfield in the past with Teoscar Hernandez. So I really think that might be an option for them. They definitely want two bats. They definitely seem to be aggressively pursuing multiple options. It could have been Teoscar Hernandez and Pete Alonso. That would have been nice. I think that would have been pretty nice, pretty dynamic, and that would have protected Pete. That second bat is extremely important to me. Extremely important because Brandon Nimmo, and it's sad to say this, he's got that plantar fasciitis, however you say it. I mean, when you have a foot injury, it's really tough to know what to expect. Could it bother him for a portion of the season? Yes, it could. It really could. But could he be okay? Yes. That's why these long-term contracts often don't work out. Really often don't work out. Mark Vientos, I think he's going to take another step in the right direction. Francisco Alvarez, I think he's that key person. He's that guy who, hit 26 home runs his first year, and then he had injuries. He had injuries in his second year. So I think he's a guy who's going to have a bounce back. And then if you add these extra two bats to Juan Soto, the Mets are going to have a top offense. That's a given if the Mets complete this the right way. If the Mets were able to get a Tanner Scott, they would have a top bullpen. Okay, now the other question is, what the heck is going on with Roki Sasaki? Now, Roki Sasaki is, I would say, could be the best pitcher this offseason, right? So if the Mets get Soto, if the Mets get Tanner Scott, and they somehow got Sasaki, they could come away with the trifecta in getting the best guy out of the bullpen, getting the best starter, and getting the best offensive guy. We'll say that. Okay, but it's going to be tough, folks. It is going to be tough because you have the Dodgers and you have the San Diego Padres potentially as front runners. In fact, the Dodgers have been labeled in the last couple of days as the front runners. But what really kind of gets to me is Wolf, the agent of Sasaki, says over and over that this guy Sasaki would like a challenge. And going to a team like the Dodgers really kind of negates that philosophy. And if he's a guy that is about his a lot of these guys care about the imprint they leave. They care about their legacy. If he is a legacy guy, there is no way he can go to the Dodgers. No way. Dodgers already won a World Series. They've won 2 World Series in the last couple of years. No way can he go to the Dodgers. No way. And I somehow feel that the Mets are this year's it team. I really do. I really do. It's come out how Sasaki likes what the Mets are doing in terms of the pitching lab and Jeremy Hefner. I like that. San Diego, I'll say, was a team that I'd say was going to be good competition for the Mets because they weren't the Dodgers. They would be more of a challenge. They do have a good situation with their pitching coach and with pitchers in general. They've done a really good job with Michael King and Yu Darvish pitching late into his 30s. And I think that is what Sasaki is his goal, to have a very long, successful, durable career. But the fact of the matter is that the Padres ownership going through this type of turmoil at the worst time, and you hear that there's infighting between the wife of the late Peter Seidler, the great owner of the Padres, and his brothers for, I'm not sure exactly what they're arguing about, but, you hear potentially they're talking about moving the team. And then you also hear that they're trying to cut payroll, potentially trading away Luis Urias, the best the hitting champ, 3-time hitting champ. Doesn't make sense. So if you're going to a team that's going all in, pedal to the metal, how could you pick the Padres? If you want a team that you care about your legacy and you care about not making it easier for yourself, how could you go to the Dodgers? Then you go across the country. And other things Sasaki is looking for, he's looking for a place with a great booming Japanese Asian population. We know you have that in Queens. You 100% have that dynamic. And then you have everything else. You have an owner who will run through a damn brick wall for a championship. There is no owner in all of baseball who will do more to make his respective team better than Steve Cohen. I mean, folks, we grew up with the Wilpons. And now we have the Cohens. I hear sometimes about, oh, you're not giving Pete $250 million. Oh, this is the Wilpon-esque. Oh my God, we just spent almost $1 billion on a superstar. You can't give every player what they want. I mean, you see, nobody's giving Pete what he wants. You got to give players these contracts with less risk. Well, why did you take a risk on Soto? Well, Soto is a generational superstar player. There will be those maybe 5 players in any given year that you would do that mega contract for, or even less than that, maybe 2 or 3 players that you would do a mega contract for. Everybody else is just average, ordinary to good players that you have to be very rational and real. If you're going to think like a fan, you're going to bankrupt your team, and you are most likely not going to be very successful at all. All right, and I don't know. It's just it's very interesting, and I will admit that we have gone through a lull in the last 2 weeks. Really, we've gone through a lull. Not too much happening, so there are a lot of Mets fans who are kind of jumping at the bit. What's our next move? And a lot of Mets fans upset with Pete Alonso. Um, and I'm just gonna comment on this too. And I really, it's really tough because I don't want anything I say, being misconstrued about Pete Alonso. I really like the guy. But at the same token, this has always been an opinion channel. Always, I want to give my true opinion. We have no obligations or affiliations with anybody. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to worry about offending this guy or offending that guy. I mean, these guys are big boys. They're professionals making millions and millions of dollars. I care about offending, the hardworking, doctors, teachers, people, who are scrapping, crawling to make a living, support their family. Those are the people I feel bad for, not the person who can't get an extra 100 million, not the person who's had two multiple offers that nobody else would have in their life. Nobody else would have in their life. And I know he provides that type of skill, but still, let's just put things in a realistic perspective. Pete Alonso has had multiple almost $100 million offers. How many people in their lives have that opportunity? So, let's put it in perspective. Pete Alonso is a big boy. But on the same token, right now, I've always said this about players. The players who take it into January, February, March, I've always looked at those guys funny because of the fact that teams are either in the process of being built or they are already built, right? You can't help but wonder how much attention are the New York Mets focused on Alonso, and how much does that take away from acquiring more pitching, acquiring more offensive options. I know the Mets can do multiple things, but let's just be realistic. If you're focused on getting Alonso, that's got to take some attention and some resources away from getting your team better in another area. So I could definitely see where some fans would be frustrated. And then the longer this drags on, I don't think this makes anybody look good. Obviously, doesn't make Scott Boras look good. And I don't think it makes the polar bear look good. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. And that's why, and players are cognizant of this. Players know that if they're going to drag out a contract negotiation in the public for 3 or 4 months, and they're going to be the last one standing that didn't agree to a contract, it's not going to make them look better. I mean, fair or not, the player is always the one that's scrutinized. Fair or not, fair or not. And I'm just pointing that out. I'm not saying right or wrong, fair or not. That's what just ends up happening. It's what ends up happening. All right. At the end of the day, like I keep mentioning, I think Pete will be a Met, and I want to be a Met. That secondary player, I would say the best possible option would probably be a Bregman. And the next level down would be a Santander. And then you got guys in the next category, like Jurassic Profar and Jesse Winker. And I mean, if you want to keep things as status quo and you like the dynamic Jesse Winker, had with you guys last year or us, then, you go with Jesse Winker, you sign Pete Alonso, you added Juan Soto, you got young guys coming up, Ronnie Mauricio, you still got Brett Beatty, Acuna. The offense can be improved with those young rookie type level players. So, and that's going to be a lot cheaper alternative. In fact, if I ask you this question, would you rather do this? Would you rather sign Pete and sign Breggy and get, a very less than average bullpen arm? Or would you rather do this? Sign Pete, sign Jesse Winker, then sign Tanner Scott with that extra money. Would you rather do that? I mean, instead of getting a Bregman, would you use that extra Bregman money to get one of the best relievers in all of baseball? Honestly, I think a lot of players, a lot of not players, a lot of fans would like that. I think you get Pete, you get Jesse Winker, and then you allocate that extra money that you were going to give to Bregman, you give to Tanner Scott. Now you have an elite bullpen. You still have, you got that big bat in Pete. Jesse Winker, he could be a very decent dynamic player, but then you could always add a player through trade throughout the course of the season. And then you got your young players too. So you have an extra position where you're not guaranteed it to a Bregman or guaranteed playing time to an Anthony Santander. Now, Jesse Winker, you could actually move him around. You don't have to worry about, that guaranteed playing time. I think, the more I think about it, I like that. I like that. Or at the end of the day, you're like, this is the New York Mets. This is Steve Cohen. They can do all of them. They can sign Bregman. They could sign Alonso. They could sign a Tanner Scott. If that's your philosophy, all for it. All for it. Now, one more thing I wanted to add. Okay, so I saw Luis Castillo. Luis Castillo, he has been in the news for, I would say, the last month and a half for being on the trade block. And Luis Castillo, he's a guy who's been pretty dynamic throughout the course of his career. With the Mariners, he's making about 22, $23 million for the next 3 years. And, the Mariners, they have a couple starters. And, as Castillo's getting older, it makes sense. They would try to see if they can shed that money and see if they can get some type of good return. Now, here's the deal. Trading Castillo is kind of difficult. Number one, he's aging. His stats in terms of strikeouts kind of have ticked down in the last couple of years. His average fastball velocity has actually went down 2 miles about 2 miles on the fastball in 2 years. So, how much do you look at that? He's striking out less, he's losing velocity. Does that sway the minds of some people? Plus, he has potentially 4 years left on that contract. That's a lot of money still, a lot of money. So there is hesitation. So if you look on a website, Baseball Trade Values, they value this guy at, I think his value is like 7 or 8. 7 or 8. So if you want to trade for Luis Castillo, that's what his trade value is. So I saw a proposed trade online, and they said the Mariners might accept a trade package like this. I don't know who the hell, where these trades come from, but they said the Mets would have to give up Jet Williams, Brandon Sproat, and Brett Beatty for Luis Castillo. Now, if you want to know total value-wise, so I said on Baseball Trade Values, Luis Castillo is about a 7 or 8. The Mets in that package would be giving up 53 points of trade value. Jet Williams is approximately 22, Sprout is 22, and Brett Beatty is around 11 or 12. So Brett Beatty alone should get the deal done. So, I mean, some of these trades are outrageous. I mean, I can understand, you asking for the moon. If you look at past trades, sometimes it'll be more than obviously the baseball trade values. What the heck is that? That's just a website. So even if you double Luis Castillo's value and you instead of 8, you make him 16 instead of 16. So maybe if you give like a Brett Beatty and another player ranked 3 or 4, a Jesus Baez, a Blake Tidwell, even a Tyler McGill is ranked number. He's got a value of 10. So if you did a Tyler McGill and you did a Luis Castillo, and I'm not saying that would work, but just for point's sake, you'd be giving up 20 points versus 7 or 8. So I think that's where I think the Mariners put Castillo out on the market with the expectation that they'd be getting decent offers. But I think they're learning right now that Luis Castillo's value isn't so high unless the Mariners are willing to eat a portion of that contract. That honestly is what is weighing down the value of Castillo, folks. I mean, those formulas, baseball trade values, you have an on-field value and then you have a salary value. So, there's some guys who can overcome the salary value. I mean, like Juan Soto signed that mega contract, but still, if you look at baseball trade values, his value is like 120, 130. He's just a mega superstar. A guy like Luis Castillo cannot overcome the aging Luis Castillo cannot really overcome the salary, even though it's not a bad salary. It's really not when you compare it to the current contracts being handed out. I mean, who's better, Sean Manaea, Luis Castillo? Luis Severino. I mean, those guys are getting the paid in the same amount of range. So I would take a flyer on Castillo if the asking price went way down. But then again, I'm not giving my prospects away. I am certainly not giving my prospects away. And then even if I do consider giving away a Jet Williams, never a Brandon Sproat. Never a Brandon Sproat. Jonathan and Brandon Sproat are right now, those are the guys who are off limits. They are off the table right now. You got to keep your young pitching. But everybody else, I would kind of look, I would explore, I'd see if, I could capitalize, incrementally get better, be opportunistic. And that's what the Mets are going to do. And I'm going to wrap up like this. And I said the same thing last year. Even if we started the season today, this is never going to be a finished product for Mr. David Stearns. He is like a fantasy baseball GM. He will continually look what the market, who's out there, free agents, trades. He will always look every day to try to upgrade this team. If it's April, if it's May, if it's June, if it's July, even if it's August, even if it's after the deadline, that is the type of general manager / president David Stearns is. He's also, quite creative. We haven't really seen that big signature trade yet. Is it coming? You know what, folks? I think, and I was thinking about this earlier when I was at work. I think this is the calm before the storm. I really do. I could see if Pete Alonso somehow doesn't come to his senses, the Mets really pulling the trigger on other options. Because there is no doubt right now, the Mets are very calm, cool, and confident in these negotiations. Number one, they may believe that they're going to get him no matter what. Or number two, if they don't get him, they are prepared to do whatever they need to do to upgrade this team, this lineup this year. And that's what it's all about. This year, this is the time, folks. You got Lindor in his prime. You got Nimmo in his prime. You got, obviously, Soto here his first year. Sanger, your best pitcher in his prime. So the New York Mets right now are primed to win now. Yes, they've got young players like Vientos, Alvarez, Mauricio, Acuna. The list goes on and on. Guys coming up in the future, Gilbert, Jet Williams. The Mets are really set up. They are really set up. And it would be so wonderful if a guy like Ryan Clifford, the first baseman we have in the minors, to go out and ball and have a magical first half. I'd love to see that because I think I think he's going to be a stud. I really do. I really like the kid. So I'm excited about that. All right, folks. We got to end this video. Is after 3:00. I got to go to work in a few hours. So thank you all for your time. Let me know if you stayed this long. If you've stayed this long, you need to let me know in the comments. You need to let me know so I can personally thank you. I really appreciate that. If you want to drop a number 5, if you don't want to say anything, drop a number 5 just so I know you stayed to the end, or at least you heard this. Thank you all, folks. I do appreciate it. I have fun. I have fun doing this. I'm here doing this because I love talking with you. It really makes my day that much better. So have a great day all, and I will speak to everybody soon. And I believe we got some really good stuff coming.